As I sat in the movie theater in 2016, I felt as though Jyn Erso was talking to me from the screen. Just like the characters in Rogue One, A Star Wars Story, I was at a place in my life where I felt powerless in the face of the pain, suffering, and injustice I was seeing in the world. It seemed easier to give into the status quo than to continue striving for an alternative. But as the lead character, Jyn Erso, rallied those around her to continue fighting against the oppressive empire, the message she gave to them was also for me. Rebellions are built on hope. Rebellions, the things that can bring about the alternatives we as a faith community sing and dream of in the world, are built on hope. And early one morning, almost 2,000 years ago, that hope became real, and a rebellion was born. During the Easter season, we remember those events and are stirred again by that hope to continue to work for God's preferred future. Matthew chapter 28 tells one of 4 accounts of the resurrection story. In this particular version, we read about 2 women coming to Jesus' tomb, not to mourn, but to see. When they arrive, they are met by an earthquake and an angel sitting outside an empty tomb. The angel tells them not to be afraid and instructs them to go and tell others what they have seen. When they leave to do so, they encounter the risen Christ himself and are again told not to fear and to go and share their experience. The women who showed up that first Easter morning helped begin the rebellion that we are all still a part of today. A rebellion that upholds the worth of all people and the sacredness of creation. A rebellion that demands economic justice and endeavors to abolish poverty and end needless suffering. A rebellion that insists on reconciliation and lives non-violently. A rebellion that ultimately seeks to usher in God's shalom. As participants in this rebellion, we can learn a lot from the women mentioned in the Matthew text. For starters, the women do not come with the needed supplies to mourn Jesus. They come ready to see and prepared to listen, with open hearts and minds, believing that what they are told is possible. We too must hold a similar openness in our discipleship. We must put aside preconceived notions and assumptions and instead listen to what it is God would have us hear. The resurrection itself challenges our preconceptions and pulls us into new understandings. The resurrection was a miraculous moment, to be sure, but more than that, it was God's commentary on the injustice and violence of the Roman Empire. It awakens us to new life, but it also awakens us to new ways of living. You see, God didn't intercede to prevent the crucifixion of Jesus. God allowed his death and then overcame it. The resurrection does not erase the crucifixion, it comments on and transforms it. It says to all those suffering under the oppression of violent rulers that those in power will not have the final word, that injustice will not be the end of the story. And it declares that this new story will be written differently than all that came before it. In the summer of 2025, I had the absolute honor of listening to one of anti-apartheid activist Desmond Tutu's daughters, Naomi Tutu, speak at a Churches for Middle East Peace gathering. In her remarks, Reverend Tutu shared about what it was like growing up under apartheid in South Africa. She shared about her dislike of school and her unwillingness to work hard in her studies. Her grandmother, who she lived with, confronted her about her poor grades and challenged her to do better. In response, Naomi declared that there was no point in working hard in school because apartheid meant that she would never be able to pursue the dreams an education would support. Without anger, her grandmother reminded her, the injustice of apartheid is not the end of the story, encouraging her to focus on her studies with a different end in mind. While not an instant radical reformation there and then, her grandmother's words subtly and quietly motivated her to work just a little harder and do just a little bit better in school. And her grandmother, of course, was right. Apartheid was eventually overcome, and Reverend Naomi Tutu was able to use her education to pursue her dreams. She shared this story to remind us that the myriad examples of injustice in our world are not the end of the story. They will not have the final word. Therefore, we must all keep working toward our shared goal of a just and peaceful world. Like Naomi Tutu being formed by her grandmother's words, we must allow ourselves to be formed by God's message delivered through the resurrection, and then live differently as a result. The Gospel of Matthew presents a story of resistance and hope that challenges the dominant powers of its time, offers an alternative vision for community and faithfulness, and calls its audience to live into a way of life shaped by God's reign as they await its full realization in Jesus' return. Some call this God's upside-down kingdom, a radical reversal of the world's usual values. Power is defined as service, greatness is measured by humility, and the first are often last, while the last are lifted up. Rather than advancing through domination, violence, or status, God's reign is revealed through love of enemies, generosity, mercy, and faithfulness in everyday life. Quiet practices that steadily turn the world right side up by turning our assumptions upside down. The earthquake that accompanied the realization that Jesus had risen symbolically points to this upside-down kingdom and signals what God is doing in the world. God is shaking things up. That which opposes the restoring and reconciling purposes of God can no longer remain. Systems and structures that oppress or demean must be challenged and overcome. Through the resurrection, God is moving us closer to this restored world. Anyone claiming to follow the resurrected Christ, therefore, must be actively engaged in this work of restoration. The women that first Easter morning understood this, and their example again holds a lesson for us. Not only were the women open to listen, they were also prepared to go and tell about their experience. For them, resurrection immediately becomes life-altering mission. And the same should be true for us. While the women were challenged to share about the resurrection with the disciples who were not present, we are called to share about the resurrection by embodying the good news in our daily lives. Talking about following Jesus in this way is one thing, but actually doing it is another thing altogether. Recently, I had the opportunity to take my 4-year-old nephew to the Peace Pavilion in Independence, Missouri. He and I had a great time and enjoyed exploring the space together. As we were nearing the end, we sat in the final room, Peace for Creation, and interacted with the pollution station. It was a giant tube connected to a fan through which you shot scarves that represented either pollution or solutions that we could do to address polluted air. As we played, a little boy, probably 2 years old, came over and watched what we were doing. I invited him to come and take turns catching scarps with us. One would shoot out for him, and then the next one would be for my nephew. The little boy was thrilled. My nephew, not so much. I could instantly tell that he did not like having to share. I gently reminded him that sharing was something peacemakers did, and we continued to play together for another few minutes before he wandered off. Later, in the car, he asked me, "What's peace?" And we talked about what it looked like. I started to give him an example, saying, "Remember when we were at the Peace Pavilion playing with the scarves and you took turns with the other kid?" But before I could finish, he cut me off and asked for a different example. You see, he didn't like thinking about that experience because it was hard for him to have to share. He wanted other examples of peace that he hadn't had to personally experience. He didn't want sharing with the little boy to be an example of peace because it was difficult for him. He wanted peace to be something that required less of him. Talking about peace in the abstract is a fairly easy and uplifting thing to do, but actually doing the hard work of applying it in our lives can be much more difficult. Still, as followers of Jesus, crucified and resurrected, it is the hard work of nonviolence and peace to which we are continuously called. The women who first encountered Jesus after his resurrection understood how daunting this work would be. And yet, when Jesus told them not to fear, they responded by choosing a joy rooted in hope instead. Similarly, we must also choose joyful hope. Jesus' resurrection is a reminder to us that even in the midst of the despair and defeat we will inevitably experience, there's still deep hope for the world. Because we already know the end of the resurrection story, it can be easy for us to forget that the Saturday after Jesus' crucifixion likely felt like an eternity for his early followers. As we seek to embody Christ's peace in our daily lives, it can often feel like an impossible cause. For you see, when you contend for peace in places where it is painfully absent, most days feel like Holy Saturday. Silent, confusing, hopeless. It is in these Holy Saturday moments when we must remember that we follow the one who tells us not to fear. We must remember that though it might feel like our work is in vain, it is still essential that we continue it. On that first Easter morning, the women did not leave the tomb with a battle plan or a promise of easy victory. They left with a story that contradicted empire, a way of life shaped by nonviolence, and a hope strong enough to send them back into a dangerous world. When Jen Erso said rebellions are built on hope, she was naming something that the women at the tomb already knew. God's rebellion does not rise through force or domination, but through resurrection. It is born when love refuses to stay dead, when truth outlasts violence, and when ordinary people decide to live as though injustice does not get the final word. To witness the resurrection is to join that holy rebellion, to come and see with open hearts, to go and embody good news in lives shaped by justice and peace, and to choose hope even when fear feels more realistic. Christ is risen. Let us rejoice. And then let us faithfully do the work of bringing resurrection to the world.